Got JD Stanley on today. JD is easily one of the most interesting people I know. He was a cage fighter that decided he wanted to see if he could do defense contracts. Ended up in Qatar and Afghanistan, Iraq. Was never in the military, but has served overseas in all these different defense capacities. Just an interesting guy. I had a blast talking to him. We are live with JD Stanley. Hey, heads up. This podcast is just literally going to be a podcast of curiosity. You do not have to believe what we're talking about. I'm not even sure if we believe what we're talking about. It's literally just kind of, I asked JD, I'll explain to you in a minute, but I just asked him if he'd come in and hang out. With everything that's going on in the world, JD's got some unique inside perspectives, and so I appreciate you jumping on, JD.
Yeah.
Tell people what it is that you do.
Well, I wear a few different hats. Number one, I'm a defense contractor. And then also one of my businesses is called shooterjobs.com, and it takes military transitioning out and then puts them into contracting roles or just finds them employment. And so that's like my main focus, main drive. I also have a firearms company and clothing line called Crusader Operator, and that's kind of a hobby business. Lets me get it in the shop, make stuff, be creative, and generate a little extra play money for me.
Kind of all lifestyle brand type stuff, though. I mean, it's all pretty much. Would you say it all kind of hovers around the same theme?
Yes. All military related or defense contracting related.
Yep. So with everything that's going on in the world right now, one of the things I think is so interesting is you seem like you've always got inside information from somewhere, and I don't even know what your sources are. But like you texted me probably 2.5 weeks ago about the malaria medicine that was in circulation as a possibility. 3 days later, Trump's talking about it. Now it's become like this national story. Everything you've told, you've sent me stuff that you Google and turns out to be true. We're in the middle of like kind of uncharted territory. Like nobody that I know has ever been through something like this. That we're globally, we're all interconnected. Anytime something like that, there's a disruption. There's gonna be people looking for opportunities. How are you from your position? How are you sort of translating everything that's going on right now?
There's a lot of disinformation going out there, and I just try and fact check everything from multiple sites. And when you see multiple legitimate sites reporting it, I tend to lean towards that. When it's one or two forums or just some site with way more ads than content, I kind of write that off until I can find some better sources for it.
Do you feel like that you read the information and then you run it through your own filter to understand what's actually being said, or do you think they're doing a good job of kind of getting the information out there in its most true form?
Combination of both. And so sometimes I'll read stuff, process it, try to read between the lines of what's really being said versus what they're reporting on, because they got to be as accurate as possible. They don't want people calling them out. But if you kind of read between the lines, you can also see what they're trying to say without putting themselves in harm's way for
libel.
Yeah.
So one of the things you sent me that I thought was so interesting, and there's been no real explanation given, but you said, this is the part where I want to clarify. Like, we're not standing behind this as fact. It's just interesting things that are going on in the world. 21 million cell phones, plans that have been canceled in China.
Yeah.
You sent me that, and and I wouldn't have even thought, like, that's what I think is interesting is that could be in the news, but people wouldn't necessarily know why that's important. So then you followed up with, this is what we know to be true. 21 million cell phone plans have been canceled, but here's why that's potentially interesting.
And so what happens is in China, it's mandated that you have a smartphone. That is how the Chinese government controls everything. That's how you buy your train tickets. When you're in the quarantine, your phone had a green screen or a red screen. If you were red, you couldn't move. If you were green, you could go through the checkpoints. It's how they run their social security programs, how you get paid on your paycheck. Everything happens through your smartphone. In fact, in China, you cannot cancel your phone plan. They just don't let you. So you can't go to Verizon and say, I'm not going to pay you anymore, anything like that. It's government mandated that you have it.
So in 21 million plans, so the general explanation is they had a lot of contractors that were there that were just immigrants working in the country that have left, and that they canceled those plans, or that there are people with business lines, and because of the economic kind of shift, that maybe they canceled their second plan. And I guess that makes sense. I mean, logically, that kind of adds up that it's possible. Do you think 21 million worth?
There's a lot of explanations that you could come up with for it. I think it's going to be a combination of all of them. I think that China has definitely not been reporting the amount of deaths they've really had for it. And then, like you said, some business plans probably got canceled, immigrants left, stuff like that. So it's going to be a combination of everything. Do I think they've had 21.5 million people die from this? Probably not quite yet, but I definitely think the numbers are a lot higher than they're letting on.
So if that's the case, then it is possible the U.S. is doing a good job. I mean, when you look at what's possibly going on or has gone on in China, then it's possible that what we're seeing here is actually fairly effective. I mean, we still see the numbers are growing. We see that it's getting bigger and taking off. But at the same time, we're not seeing what we now think is potentially is way worse in China. We were always like compared to China. What I'm seeing in the news is like we're always comparing to China and like, oh, they only had this many. Now we're already past that. So we must be doing a bad job. But if China's reporting was accurate, maybe we're doing, do you see what I'm saying? Like maybe it's possible we're doing better than they thought.
I think we're doing a lot better than we thought. And I think it's a lot more prevalent than we think. A Swiss study published yesterday said that they're finding that up to 50% of the people are asymptomatic, meaning you have it, but you show no symptoms. You won't even know you have it.
Right.
And those are actually the most dangerous people because they're the ones that I'm not
Still
sick.
spreading it.
I'm going to the grocery store doing stuff like that. And I've read multiple studies as low as 25% and up to 50% show no symptoms for the entire duration.
Right.
And so I think our numbers are actually a lot higher than what we know about because you can't get tested in a lot of places. Like in Oregon, for example, if you go to the hospital, they don't have the test.
Right. You can't just like drive up and get it done.
Yeah. I think, Oregon's only tested 6,000 to 8,000 people total. And
out of 3 million in the state.
Yeah.
And so the numbers, it's a weird one because like the numbers are going up. So it seems like, oh, this is terrible. But we don't know how many people actually had it to begin with. So the reporting is kind of weird because it's possible that we're not even getting an accurate idea of what's actually going on.
Well, the numbers are also going up because more people are finally getting tested. They're making these tests around the clock. And so that's another reason that the numbers are going up. And what's kind of funny is, 1975, they got a convention of all the scientists study earthquakes. And they said, we're getting so much more seismic activity, the Earth's shaking apart. And they couldn't figure out why, so much more seismic activity was going on until one genius finally said, well, 20 years ago, we didn't even have these meters. And we've been installing them around the world for the last 20 years. So, of course, we're getting more seismic data because we have more tests. The Earth isn't shaking itself apart.
We're becoming aware of what's already been true.
Exactly.
Been true.
And so I think, the more tests that come out, the more people are going to test positive.
Right. Right. But what we're seeing is the deaths related to it. We know what those are. Those we do know. I mean, we know pretty accurately if someone dies, upper respiratory stuff. I think there have been some flu deaths that have probably been attributed to the coronavirus. But I mean, it's interesting to me because we have a pretty accurate count in the U.S. of how many people are dying. We don't know how many people have it. So the optimist in me says, well, wait a minute, maybe it's way less deadly than we even thought because we're basing these numbers on the tests that we have. If what you're saying is like there is a way higher infection rate where way more people have it than we realize, we still know how many deaths. And then what that does is drives the percentage of deaths down even for affected people. Am I right?
No, that's definitely correct. And that's one of the reasons why I wish we could get more testing because it would drive that percentage down and,
drive the fear down with it.
The fear down with it. It also kind of shows that the U.S. has got this under control. South Korea has been the golden target of a 1.2% death rate. I think if we actually had more testing, more numbers, we would be
closer to that.
I think we'd be well below it. I think we'd be about 0.8%.
Right. Yeah, that's the weird disadvantage of politicizing everything is because it's so hard to decide. I think the virus is a real deal. I think it's important to take steps, all that. I'm not a denier. I think it is. But at the same time, I know that while the door is open for the pandemic, in it is going to come political agendas, right? Like there are going to be people that are trying to capitalize on an opportunity. Not saying the opportunity is bad, isn't bad. It obviously is. But in your mind, where do you see that politics? Because this is where it gets murky for me. Of like, if I just knew what was true, it would be so much easier for me to form an opinion. I kind of battle between what is true and what is politically driven. Do you see with what you're doing? Do you see politics already sort of popping its head up?
Yeah, and this was a really good chance for people to throw politics aside, come together as a nation, do the right thing, help people out, and you're not seeing that.
Don't you think though there was like a 2-week period where it felt like it was going to go that way? Like around the 10th or 12th of March, somewhere everybody started to realize like, oh my gosh, this is real. It almost felt like for a minute there, they kind of did. you had Cuomo and Trump getting along, which in my mind was an interesting, because they've always been so adversarial, but it didn't last very long.
Yeah, and they were going to speed past this bill, get Americans money now. We're going to help you out right now. And then it was delay in politics as they were starting to insert their own personal agendas.
Don't you think that caused people to take the virus less seriously? This is my opinion. I feel like that once we got distracted where they're bickering again, it wasn't even about a stimulus package. It was literally like, oh, well, how much of this is political then? And then it was almost like you saw people take a more lax view on the quarantine. Like, why aren't you taking it serious? It's because, like, well, you guys seem to not be. Because if it was serious and we all unanimously agreed something needed to happen right now, but when they delay it because of politics, it seems like it kind of almost leaks out and diminishes how seriously we take it in the streets.
Exactly true. I think another reason why we were so slow to even start paying attention to it is we had the impeachment going on. And so with the impeachment, everyone's focused on that.
Distracted with
no one's even caring about what's going on in China. And what was kind of interesting to me is back in January, one of my buddies starts just sending me report after report of this thing coming out in China. This is mid-January, before a case even hit the U.S. And I talked to my wife, and I was like, I don't get it. Cole never freaks out about anything. Why is this dude freaking out?
Right. Why is he freaking about this?
Yeah. And I even asked him, I was like, what's going on here, man? You never go off about anything like this. He goes, I'm telling you, this one's different. I don't know why this one's different. And this was mid-January, and it was kind of like, all right, man, well, whatever drugs you're on, please share or stop.
Did he say, like, it's a big deal because strictly the impact it's having on people's lives, or it feels charged, like that somehow there's something going on around the nebulous of the sickness also?
For him, I think something was charged. It's because he was getting the reports out of China. They were starting to quarantine people in Wuhan, starting to do the lockdown, and for some reason he was already panicking about it. And this was, like I said, really, really early on, before it even left China.
So he saw maybe, and I'm just asking, but do you think he saw the potential that it was going to have more than just virus impact? Like this was going to carry political, economic, global, national impact?
Yeah, he pretty much called it all. And for someone that said it never freaks out, for him to freak out about anything was kind of unusual in itself. And then for him to be right this whole time, I've been telling him, like, dude, you're my new weather meter, whatever, whatever you say.
Fine, I believe you. So your background, you didn't spend time enlisted.
No.
And so before you got into what you do with the defense contract, what was the, I feel like I know this answer, but I want to hear it from you to make sure I understand it. You had a background in fighting.
Yeah, I was a professional fighter, like the ultimate fighting, cage fighting stuff for 8 years. College wrestler, went straight into fighting, and then was doing bodyguarding stuff, low-level defensive contracting, just kind of getting my foot in the door. And then
when you say defensive contract, I want to make sure that I understand it. This is not for people who are enlisted military. This is for people with a military background that have got all the experience. They're trained by the government, but now they've gotten out of the service, and they go back now as private contractors for more money to go do things that are not necessarily connected directly to the U.S. government. Is that right?
Partially. You're still very much connected to the U.S. government.
Okay.
And you're limited on what you can and can't do. So, the Geneva Convention, contractors cannot be used in any offensive operations.
You can't, like, send them out on missions and go.
No.
Okay.
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
So, for example, in Iraq, we would take the Army Corps of Engineers out. They'd be looking at a bridge. We'd go out on the mission and guard them while they're looking.
But it's still a defensive action in the midst of an offensive.
Yeah,
contract.
we're not going out kicking down doors, raiding villages, stuff like that. That's not what contractors do. We can only be used to defend people, places, and things. And so if we're shooting, that means we're getting shot at, or someone's shooting at the people we're protecting.
You're defending a noun somewhere.
Yeah.
So you're doing low-level defense type stuff. What does that mean, like, locally? You said you're doing smaller type stuff. What were you doing?
That was in Vegas. As I said, doing the fighting thing, bodyguarding, and then just some other government contracting stuff.
And what was your first connection with that? Because I would think, like, the average fighter right now that might be listening goes, okay, I'm a fighter, but what is that? What's the connection point between fighting and then now all of a sudden you're doing defense contract? Where did that start?
Well, it started, I don't know if you ever heard of Blackwater. They were pretty famous for screwing up, and a couple dumb guys out of 100,000 good ones.
Sure.
And some of the guys I grew up with, one went on to be a scout sniper, one was a Navy SEAL, and they were like, "Dude, you got to come over here. We'll get you over here. We know that we grew up shooting with you. We can get you on." I'm like, "You guys are crazy. I will get killed to like step off the plane. You're a SEAL. You're a scout sniper. Like
Right.
I got nothing."
Right.
And then the 2008 recession hit, and all of the fight shows dried up. It went from you could get a fight easily to
Nothing.
gone.
Yeah.
And so I sent him an email. It was kind of blew my mind because on a Friday I was like, "Okay, if you guys can get me over there, sure." Because they were just hounding me weekly about, "Dude, come over. We'll get you over. The money's great. Like, come on over." And Friday night, sent him an email. Say, "You know what? Fine. If you guys can get me over there, I'll do it. Why not?"
And when you say there, where were they?
They were in Iraq at the time.
You're saying you signed up to go to Iraq from Vegas.
I just told them jokingly, well, I guess not jokingly, but not even believing that it was possible.
Right.
They said, "Okay, you know what?
Sure.
Sure, do it," because they were just hounding me a bunch. And Sunday morning, I had an email with a plane ticket going back to Washington, D.C. for a tryout. And first day of any training you do for any new company is your PT test. And week before, I'm in a professional fight gym.
Right.
And so I smoked.
Right.
I, needless to say, passed the PT test pretty easily.
Right.
And then, weapons proficiency. I grew up shooting. I definitely knew my way around guns and everything like that. So passed that kind of stuff. And what I think really helped was during the PT part, I finished first and then went back and was kind of coaching the people still coming through.
Right.
I was just kind of from the fighting background because, I was a professional fighter, but I also coached.
Sort of the culture of a gym.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was also one of the coaches on the team and just kind of, coached and encouraged the guys coming back through. And out of a training class of 50, I was one of 25 that got selected.
So right now, that's not even possible anymore. Like 2020, You're not even allowed to be considered unless you've got years experience in the background of the military.
I was probably one of the last people that slipped through the cracks on that one.
Yeah.
And so now you must be former military, minimum 4 years. They prefer combat arms, everything like that. In Iraq and Afghanistan, I was literally the only person in the country with my job that did not have a military background.
Just as civilian as it gets over there on a defense contract.
Yep. And every boss I ever had, the first day wanted to send me right back home.
Really?
They're like, "What the heck are you doing here? How did you even get on here?" And
You're like, "I'm going to be honest, total mistake."
pretty much.
Don't worry, I got you.
Pretty much. I was like, "Well, I got a clearance. You guys are desperate."
So from the time that you get there, how long is it before you're seeing something live? Like what was your first eye-opening experience when you get over there?
So if I didn't go to Iraq right off the bat, I went to a country called Qatar, which is a peninsula off Saudi Arabia. I was there for 8 months of basically on-the-job training. And, that's a pretty safe country. There's Taliban running around everywhere, but it's used for business. Mm-hmm. And the king there kind of has the rules of everyone's allowed in, you can all do business, but if you mess up, your bloodline's erased.
Yeah.
And he doesn't mess around. It's the biggest Catholic church in the Middle East is in Qatar, and it's under the king's protection. He's Muslim, but he says this is for my people, and if anyone messes with this,
you and everyone you know.
Yeah, it
seems like a pretty good incentive.
Pretty much. It's actually a really safe country for being where it's at.
To train and figure out how to get to the next step for what you needed. I mean, what a great opportunity.
Yeah. And so for me, I spent 8 months there, and then, my security clearance was getting processed.
Now, at this point, what company or organization, when you get paid and you're in Qatar, who's writing the check for that?
So at the time, that was with a company called DynCorp.
Okay.
And, they're one of the big defense contractors. And then after my clearance got processed, I switched over to a company called SOC, which is Special Operations Consultants. And so then I got actually sent back to the U.S. for a few weeks, more training, got to do the high-speed driving schools and all the real fun stuff.
Awesome.
And then...
Are you a car guy?
Yeah, a little bit.
In those situations, yes.
Yeah. Well, back then even more so.
Yeah.
I always kind of went with like the pro fight thing of fast cars,
right,
lifestyle, and so
fits the brand.
And now you're putting me on a racetrack and telling me go as fast as you can, to get, reverse, do the 180s, all this kind of stuff, and they're actually showing you how to do it. It's like, wow, okay,
wow,
sweet.
Is it like at this point? Is it just kind of hard to process that this is real life? I mean, because that to me, like I'm listening, I'm trying to imagine myself in that situation. Like I just can't conceptualize what you're taking in at that point of like, wait a minute, I'm actually training for potential combat. Like I'm training for a moment where I may actually be in danger. Well, and fighting, like you've got a competitor when you're fighting, but it's not necessarily, I mean, everything's life threatening to a degree, but this is a whole new level. I mean, you're talking about like a totally different situation.
It definitely was a different situation. I didn't really view it like that because to me it was like I'm getting to do all kinds of cool stuff. Like you're handing me an assault weapon for my daily job. Like
Yes,
exactly. And then they're like, okay, you got to go to driving school. Well, for what? Like, well, so you can learn how to do the
Evasion.
high speed evasion, drive through barricades, barriers, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I was mind blown. Just
right.
I can't believe it. Like I'm actually getting
how old,
to do this.
How old were you?
At the time I was probably 26, 27.
So that's still, you're kind of on that edge, but you're still young enough. You kind of get to view it with youthful exuberance. I mean, there's an excitement of being a young man.
Youthful stupidity.
Yeah, well.
And so, training for combat, like, yeah, that's what I was doing, but it wasn't really, like, it never really clicked in, like, okay,
It didn't feel like combat when you're in a safe environment. Your coach is telling you how to do it.
Yeah, and you're doing stuff that you think is the coolest stuff on earth anyways. Like, okay, let me play with explosives legally. Like,
Right.
okay. And then, so the training part, that was just a lot of fun. Coming from a fighting background, getting a cage fight, yes, it's dangerous, but there's also a referee, there's, medics around, stuff like that. And I actually learned pretty quickly in hand-to-hand combat training that combat is a lot different than cage fighting with rules.
I had a buddy one time that was talking about that he's watched CIA agents and they're working, they'll put like glow in the dark paint or glue or oil on a pretend knife and they'll practice hand-to-hand combat with a knife. And he said what they find is when they turn the lights on and you can see who got marked up, that most times in a knife fight, everyone dies. Like they're training, but like you don't realize how deadly that is, the hand-to-hand combat. If there's knives, the survival rate is way lower than you'd think.
You're going to get cut.
Yeah.
And in fighting hand-to-hand with a knife, you're going to get cut no matter what. And no matter how much training you want to do, 99% of that goes out the window when it comes to life.
Which in that regard, having been in a fight in your life, the adrenaline is not going to negatively affect you in the same way it may affect someone who's literally never been in a fight.
That's true.
You know what I mean? So like in the heat of the moment, you're I would think at a tactical advantage having just been in physical altercations.
And definitely understand the adrenaline dumps. And so my body was already conditioned for that. And I didn't know anything about adrenaline dumps until my first ever fight. And what happens is you're getting the fight or flight mode, your body uses all the adrenaline at once. And then it doesn't matter how good a shape you're in, when that adrenaline wears off,
You're done.
oh, you're crashing.
Yeah.
And I remember being between the first and second round, wanting to die, couldn't even get air in me fast enough. My coach was like, "What, you're tired already?" No.
Well, like in your mind, you're like, why am I so tired? Like this is nothing. And
Well, I was like, we trained, 5 rounds. I'm in the end of the first, and I'm thinking like, I can barely get off the stool for the second.
Right.
Thankfully, I knocked the guy out in the second because I might have been dead in the third.
right.
But that's also when I learned what the adrenaline
Like you see
dump
people
is.
get in a car wreck and they're just shaking uncontrollably. Like physically, it's like you see people when they have that adrenaline dump moment, 30 seconds later, it's like they're physically they can't even control themselves, even though they aren't physically tired. But like what you're saying, when it hits, it almost like exhausts your whole body all at once.
Well, when you see them shaking, they're actually still in the adrenaline moment.
Okay.
And so they're shaking because their body's giving them all the energy they need, but they have nothing to do with it. And so the dump actually makes you tired. For example, I actually fell asleep at dinner in a restaurant after the fight. When the dump happens, like you have no energy. And if the person's still shaking, that means they're
still in it.
Yeah, they're full of adrenaline. And so when it came to the combat stuff, my body had already been trained to go through the dumps or basically not have, the peaks and valleys.
Sure.
You just kind of keep it constant. And in Qatar, everything was pretty mellow, tame. First day in Iraq, I'm getting shot at.
Really? Day one?
Day one.
So you land, and in your mind, did you kind of expect that day one, like, were guns hot, or did you kind of think there'd be a transition period? I mean, going into Iraq, what was your expectation?
Going in, I was going to Ramadi, which was in the Triangle of Death. And so I kind of had
Ramadi's right. That's where Chris Kyle kind of got his name.
Yep. And so...
Shout out North Texas.
And I kind of knew from the news reports and talking to people and everything that
You were going right in.
yeah.
So when was the first time you saw Ramadi? Because like you're going through this, you're going through the training. At what point do they go, all right, well, JD, there's Ramadi? Like when, how far before you got there did you hear that that's where you're going?
Basically last day of training. I think, well, there was a lot of speculation because I went through a combat lifesaver course previously with DynCorp, and then I was getting ready for go to Iraq. They sent the only Army medic and the only guy with the lifesaver certificate to Ramadi. We both just kind of looked at each other like, oh.
Like maybe that was the plan all along, that they were preparing you to go there from the beginning?
Well, maybe not from the beginning, but
Early
at
on.
least people with the most medical training, like you're going to the hottest spot.
Mm-hmm.
And on the map at the time, Ramadi was definitely the hottest spot.
You tell me how far into it you want to get, because obviously there's got to be stuff that you're not allowed to talk about, I would assume. But what was your job when you got there? What was your job description?
So when I first got there, we were doing something called force protection, basically protecting the base. And what that does is for every contractor or contract guard in a tower, on a gate, whatever, that's one more soldier they can have out in the field. So anything they can use use this defensively for, they're going to.
Yeah. Stay here, guard base, while they go out and do what they got to do.
Yep. And in the towers, we had Kenyans and Ugandans that we actually contracted from there. They were former military from
Good soldiers?
some.
Warm bodies?
Yeah. They'd fall asleep quite a bit in the towers on duty.
I would be afraid that I would never sleep over there. Like, I don't sleep very good anyway, but like being in a place where there's actually the presence of danger, I don't know how people can I don't get how people can fall asleep. Unless it's the adrenaline dump you're talking about.
Well, actually, it's like day 1 rocket attack, you're sprinting for a bunker. You know, day 300 rocket attack, you just kind of pull your Kevlar over you and go back to sleep.
It's just hard to fathom. It's just hard to imagine.
It is. You get really used to it, and you know there's direct fire and there's indirect fire. And direct fire means someone is directly
aiming for you.
Yes, and indirect fire, it would be rockets, mortars, stuff like that. And I kind of learned pretty quick that if indirect fire takes you out, it's just God calling you home.
Yeah.
Because there's
Totally unintentional anyway.
no way you can avoid it. We lost one of our guys. He kind of gruesome, but he was in his truck in a parking lot. He was smoking a cigarette. Window was rolled down 3-4 inches. Mortar went off, on the other side of the road. Well, a piece of shrapnel had gone through the crack in his window,
Right.
hit him right in the head. And no one knew he was dead for hours.
Well, like you said, how do you avoid stuff like that? That is so random. There's no way to defend against it.
And
when was the first time you encountered something that was like what was the first person that you lost that you were in proximity to? How long did it take from the time that you got there before you saw somebody go?
Probably about 4 weeks. And we were probably the first time we lost someone on the base.
Was that the first time it all felt real?
No, it felt real. I mean, day 1 when you're watching red tracers go right by your head. That was the reality of it. It was okay. This isn't
very real.
Isn't games. Yep. And then call me a little bit psycho, but I was kind of laughing like, this is fun.
There's something I don't think that's psycho at all. I think there's something that's in a young person that wants to do something meaningful, and so when the threat of life and death is present, then the stakes are real. Like maybe what you're doing, like take somebody who does something like jumps out of an airplane with a squirrel suit. It's not that the act itself is virtuous, but when life and death is on the table, it at least feels like the stakes are real, if that makes sense. And I mean, I'm not encouraging anybody to do that, but I think it's wired into some people that they want to be a part of something that actually has value or consequence. And so like you're saying, when life and death is present, I think that does bring out something that's in us that maybe we haven't ever accessed before. Maybe you've never felt that before, and then all of a sudden you feel it, and there's something that in us reacts to that.
Yeah, and also you start to establish a purpose with it. I at first went over there for a paycheck, and then once I get there and I start, I'm guarding the troops, running the mission, stuff like that, keeping people safe, protecting military and civilians. Like you start to feel it's more of a purpose than it is a paycheck.
Right. Well, and you're not getting to spend it. It's not like you're getting to go home at night and go spend it on anything fun. So now all of a sudden the money doesn't really even matter because like you got to get home for that money to even count anyway. So it would make sense that the money would sort of disappear in the middle of it. And so you're in Iraq for how long? The first time?
I'd probably say 14, 15 months before I actually left Iraq. And then I was going between Iraq and Afghanistan back and forth.
Where were you at in Afghanistan? Are you allowed to say?
I was all over, outside of Kabul, but a few different bases.
Did you ever spend any time in the Kandahar Valley?
Not much.
So there's books and stuff about that. And I know nothing at all. But just some of the books and stuff like the bases and like the camps and stuff up there in the mountains right there on the Pakistan border. It's fascinating to me how we've talked about this actually on this podcast, but like if you were to take all the people and just move them out, it looks like a vacation destination. And yet it's one of the hottest contested, travel spots for all the terrorists and stuff like that. And like I'm so fascinated with Afghanistan. What was your experience there?
It's a different planet. The places we were at, there was no green, there was no anything.
Really?
It was just rocks, and you'd go 12, 15 miles down what you could barely call a donkey trail.
Yeah.
And here's, 7 or 8 mud huts. And then you go another 20 miles, here's a dozen mud huts. And, these people.
That's every day. They're there every day, and that's home, and that's where they grew up.
Yeah. And I was looking around going, a long time ago, y'all should have been like, there's got to be something better than this.
You know what's crazy? That even happens here in the U.S., not to the same degree, but like every now and then going to a rodeo or something in a town you've never been in, you go through a little small town, and it's a little small town that's just a dot on the map. If it wasn't for that rodeo, you'd have never gone through that. But there are homes there, and you see people that are living like in these houses, and it's weird because to me, you're just driving by it on your way somewhere, but you have that moment of like, this is their everyday experience. There's somebody that's home to them every single day, and it's just a much different experience, and it's hard to connect like my life and their life. We live on the same planet. We're the same species of human, but we are having a very different experience on this exact same planet.
Every time I drive through Mitchell, Oregon, which for the viewers is about an hour and a half away from here, It's this little dot, and you always just go, why? Who stopped here and for why?
We've actually got some good friends that are in Mitchell, and they moved out there and started a hostel for like the bicyclists that go through there, and they love it. That I swear, listening to them talk about it, I started getting this like, okay, all right, I kind of get it. But it's the human connection piece. Mm-hmm. So like in Afghanistan, you meet someone that lives in one of those mud huts. Instantly, it becomes more relatable because it's about a person, not necessarily about the mud hut. And so that's true no matter where you go. You see people that are on the same planet in the same year, which that in of itself, the statistically is such a small sliver. And yet, even within that similarity of same planet, same time, totally different life experiences.
Completely different. And over there, education's a lot different. In the villages, there's no schools. You learn what your grandfather taught your father that taught you.
And most of that's fighting, right? Isn't most of what they do over there related to combat or conflict of some sort?
Conflict, yeah. I wouldn't say direct fighting, but Afghanistan seems like it's always been under conflict, since forever. But most of them don't even understand what Afghanistan is. They don't understand that Afghanistan's even a country because they just know their village, their tribe.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
So they know this rock. They've never been on the other side of that mountain. They don't know what's on the other side of that mountain. They don't even care about that other side of that mountain. They just know this valley.
They've got homeschool confidence.
Yes. And so, the knowledge that comes in and out, like we come in, they're like looking at aliens or something. Like, okay, you got.
Yeah, you're from where? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You even tell them like, well, Afghanistan, they look at you confused, like, huh? Like, no,
really?
we're the
like
tribe.
Tribal.
Yeah. And so Afghanistan is very tribal, and they will usually only come together to fight off an outsider. Once the outsider leaves, they go back to fighting each other.
Yeah.
And
so just constant conflict.
Clear back to the days of Napoleon.
Yeah.
And it's the only country.
Didn't they fight off, somebody ought to Google that, but didn't they fight off like Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great? Like, weren't they a part of pretty much every global movement they've had?
And
some sort of a.
They have never once been conquered. Actually, Time Magazine did a big deal on that while I was over there. Actually, I was reading about it.
Yeah.
And so many people have tried to conquer that country, and no one ever has.
And yet they're so far behind in their fighting. Like you look at how they live. They're thousands of years kind of like behind modernity, and yet they're impossible to conquer.
They're impossible to conquer because they don't act like a country. You're not conquering one country. You've got to conquer
Every single little
1,000
village.
countries.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I coined the phrase, they build antiques, because you would look at a building that's got scaffolding on it that they're making right then, and you would swear it was 1,000 years old.
They're making antiques today. They're making something old in an instant.
Well, because in their way of life, this is how Muhammad did it. It was good enough for him. It's good enough for me. So they still make bricks the exact same way that they did 1,600 years ago. Construction's done the exact same way. It's just a very different planet.
I read a book, and I can't remember the name of the author. It was about a camp that got overtaken up there at once. But they said even the dogs are mean. Like, the dogs would come to their village, and like as puppies, just random stray dogs, and like they'd kind of, they're just covered in fleas. Even the dogs are living in conflict, and their dog they had to get rid of because as it got older, it got mean and started biting other people on the base. And they're like, everything over there is just geared towards tough conflict. Like that, his point was like, even the dogs, like everything that lives there lives in conflict.
Definitely true.
Okay. I'm getting off topic here because I want to get to some conspiracy theories here in a minute. So you're there for 15 months. You go to Afghanistan after that, and then
I was back and forth. And so
what's the longest you've been outside of the U.S.?
2 years, like, straight at one point.
Okay.
And so coming from the civilian background, not having the training, but thinking everything that I was doing was ultra cool, I was, the first guy to always volunteer for training, because all the military guys were like, oh man, another school, like, oh, whatever. And so it'd get to the point where, our boss would come up and like, okay, because on every contract, you must have 5 people with this certification, 3 with that, all this different stuff. And boss would go, okay, we, gotta send 5 people to this, and we got JD, who's the 4 others?
They just knew that you had already gone through everything they had to offer.
Well, I'd take everything that they had to offer. Because to me, it was really cool. Like, okay, I'm going to go learn to blow stuff up today. Like, we're going to do, learn how to do door breaching. Like, and military guys would pass that up. I'm like, you're going to pass up a chance to get to go legally blow something up and not get in trouble?
Don't you think, though, that some people are born, I believe this, I think some people are born with curiosity, and they're just incurably curious about everything. New experiences, learning new things, reading. Like, some people come equipped with curiosity. And then there's other people that they maybe come with like faithfulness or diligence. They're just good hard workers. They're salt of the earth kind of people, and yet they're just not curious. It doesn't, I'm not even saying good people, bad people, smart people, intelligent. That's not what I'm saying. There just seems to be some people that, like, they're not curious. They're just looking for a way to kind of go throughout their day and get through it. Would you agree?
I'll agree with that until I think everyone has things they're curious about. And so different people could be interested in different things.
Okay.
And for where I was at, I was curious about everything around me because like I said, brand new and getting to do stuff that you can't do as a civilian.
Legally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I say,
sure.
Legally, I can't go play with C4 right now, but over there I could.
Right.
And so I would volunteer for every training they'd offer me, no matter how pathetic it seemed, because it was still, it might lead to something cool.
Right.
And eventually I was the only guy with the company with all these random certs that, a special mission would come up, we're like, okay, we need someone with like this, this, and this. Do we have anyone in the whole company? One person? All right, we'll send him.
Right. So you got brand new opportunities that wouldn't have been available.
Yeah. So I, get to fly over to Lebanon, pick up a crate of AK-47s, bring back for the guard tower, stuff like that. Because I just had all these random certificates, been all these random schools.
Right.
That when it came to certain things, they're like, well, you're the only one with the certs.
You're like the one that all the different circles connect and overlap. Your JD's in the middle of all the different training. You're the guy.
Yeah.
What? How long? And you can just say pass. If you don't talk about it, just say pass. But how long were you in before you ever were in a physical altercation where what you learned fighting in a cage came in handy? You can say pass. You say pass. We'll talk about something else.
No, actually, I can talk about that. I can't think about how long it would have been in. Probably within the first year in Ramadi, we actually had some people get onto base that weren't supposed to be there. Okay. And we had orders to detain them.
Okay.
And I happened to be with, the 2 guys who were kind of doing small patrols looking for these people, and we found them.
Okay.
And, had to...
Detained them.
Yes. And we couldn't just shoot them,
Okay.
with whole laws and
Right.
Geneva Code
Right.
stuff like that. And so, we're trying to take these guys in. This guy wraps me up and he's, trying to fight me. I'm like, right. And so he tried to like a trip takedown.
Could you tell he had absolutely no idea what he was doing, or do you think he had learned how to fight and thus had more confidence in what he thought he knew?
He had a little bit of knowledge because he went for legitimate trip takedown like you would see in wrestling. But
Which would mean, if that's the case, if you're in Iraq and you see somebody that's got combat training, does that pretty much guarantee that they're under somebody else's directions that's not on your side? I mean, is there what I'm saying is like, he's not just a random citizen that just happened to walk in. Like, he was there specifically.
yeah, he was former military.
Yeah.
And then with the Iraqi military gone, they become militia, stuff like that.
Sure. Okay.
And so this guy went for a trip takedown, and thankfully my prior training for wrestling and fighting kicked in, and I actually stepped around it and threw him in a beautiful throw. And
How many people saw it?
Probably about 8.
Sweet. Because that's what, you don't want to do anything awesome and then nobody gets to see it.
Yeah. But then the unfortunate thing for me is this guy starts biting me, and we're trying to detain him.
Not allowed.
And
That's against the rules.
You think that. But then this is the exact same week that all over CNN was a Navy SEAL for punching a detainee.
Oh,
And so all I'm thinking of, great, if I punch this dude, I am going to be all over CNN right now. So I got this guy biting me. Like, I'm afraid to punch him or do
Right.
anything overly physical other than we're trying to get cuffs on the guy. And so that was kind of the lesson there of don't get on CNN, but at least
you don't have to take getting bit either.
Yeah, well, I for years had a perfect scar right here of all.
No
You
way.
can see every tooth he had in him.
So how far into, because like what later happens is shooter jobs. And when you and I met, you had a Facebook page, and we'll get to this. I want to get to the bottom of that because you and I still haven't talked about this really. I mean, we've mentioned it in passing, but how far into all this? You're over there for 2 years. How long into your being back and forth on defense contracts does the idea of shooter jobs come up?
It probably came up about a year over there because you're always, contracts end and you're always looking for the next one.
Right.
And, you're looking through 100 different companies' websites every day to see if they posted a new job or not. And it slowly just kind of, I had a business background, degrees from Oregon State, stuff like that. And slowly just kind of came to me like, hey, I wish there was one place you could go and just see the new jobs for that day.
Yeah.
And so I started talking to the people who recruited me and the other companies I'd worked with. Said, hey, if I created this site,
Like a job board.
yeah. I said, I only advertise to military. Would you guys send me the jobs? And everyone jumped on board. And said, like, oh God, yes, that'd help us out so much. Like, you're only going to advertise to the military. You're going to like push away the Call of Duty wannabes, like that I kind of was. I was like, yeah. And so that was kind of how it developed. And then, the companies were.
It's just a connection point between the people who need defensive contractors and defensive contractors. It's the go-between point between people who need it and people who are looking for it.
Yeah. And so with shooterjobs.com, you can log on, and then every single day, 7 days a week, there's new jobs getting posted on because there's hundreds of thousands of contractor positions around the globe. And they're always, people retire, quit, go home, take care of their kids, all stuff like that every day. And so every day there's new jobs coming open, and it kind of helps the military because when I was over there, having not been prior service, I actually felt bad about getting my paycheck making, 5 to 10 times as much as some of the guys.
An enlisted soldier that's doing the same. Yeah.
Well, it's not doing the same. It's actually in more danger.
Right. No, but I mean, he's in the exact same amount of danger you said more, but
They're out doing the door kickings. They're clearing the villages, and they're in the real danger. I'm like, man, I got pretty easy and making a lot.
Yeah.
And so I started, helping them get into contracting because
there you go.
A lot of guys, when they get back from their deployment, they were ETS.
Re-enlist because they don't have.
Or they were planning to get out. And so they, kind of hit up the contracts like, hey, how can I get on with you?
Yeah.
And so I started really trying to help them. And that also, kind of helped with shooter jobs and everything was getting all the jobs in one place and then going after military that are transitioning out so they can have the resource to go find like where how to get hired, where to.
Sure.
And then I, coach them through the process, help them with resumes, everything like that.
So when we first met, you're on Facebook. That was kind of like your main catch net for people that were out there that maybe didn't know something like that existed. That was sort of your storefront basically was this is what, and then once, you know, like the average guy, I'm just watching like memes and funny stuff. Like you're always posting stuff that was just funny, whether it was appropriate or not is secondary, but it was always funny. But that was sort of like the storefront. And then to inquire about a job, that was sort of your catch net. You had, at the height of that, you had 1 million followers. Was there 1 million followers?
Pretty close to that, yeah.
And then just this year, or I guess 2019.
Yeah, December 28th.
Not that you're counting. December 28th.
Yeah. Woke up and found out that Facebook had deactivated the page, along with a bunch of other pro-military pages got wiped out that week.
Which is interesting to me because you were actually serving a practical purpose. You're not just some guy in a basement that's just posting random, you know, nonsense. Yeah. It was actually a functioning business, and Facebook, for whatever reason, like I can understand if they felt like that there was just militant crazy people out there, I can understand, I'm not defending it, but I can understand the thought that they don't want to empower people to have too much visibility if they see them as being a threat. At a general level, I think that's a very innocuous description, but I could understand it. But what you're doing is actually a practical connection point between people who are coming out of the military looking for new employment. Like this was a job for you.
Yeah, and every day I was posting jobs on Facebook to people to see. The memes were, you know, the haha funny were mostly for the people overseas that need the laugh,
Right.
or the military members that follow the page.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot was about the camaraderie, patriotism, stuff like that. Some of it was, you know, a little bit off humor, but soldiers get it.
Yeah.
But a lot of jobs would get posted on there.
Right.
And to this day, they've never explained why it was unpublished. I always get the same message. Well, our internal review team deemed it should not be on Facebook, and they don't tell us why. This is all the information we have to share with you.
So this, in my mind, this gives a little bit of credence to the conspiracy theory in all of us. I think all of us have a little bit of this, like what's actually going on? What do we actually not know? And I know that your time overseas, just in some of the stories we've talked about, there are things that go on that we don't know about. Like, and for good reason. I think the military needs to have whatever is the most cutting edge modern equipment. That's where that's where it belongs. It needs to be in their hands. But that means there's a lot of stuff we don't know about. And because there's a lot of stuff we don't know about, it opens the door for the question of like, what else don't we know? What else is going on? And I'll admit, I don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist, but it is interesting to listen to people with a certain background, with a certain amount of inside track, just kind of mulling over ideas, if this makes sense. So you see them come in, they delete your page. In your mind, what do you think is the driving motivation behind that?
You know, I think Mark Zuckerberg has meddled in more elections than Putin and destroyed more free speech than Hitler. Facebook does whatever is in Zuckerberg's agenda at the time. And, you know, he's even gone in front of the government, Senate trials, and when he deleted all the Tea Party pages because he didn't like the right. And they said, you basically said, yeah, I deleted them. What are you going to do about it?
Right.
And the government is actually scared of this guy.
Well, and that's what gets me is that he censored the president of Brazil's speech and threatened him that if he didn't take it down, that they would deactivate his account. And it was because he referenced hydroxychloroquine, which was this potential, like it could be making things better. Well, they threaten. Here's what concerns me. Here's what makes me nervous. When unelected tech companies have more control over the flow of information than elected national leaders, that's where I start to go like, wait a minute, is the social media thing kind of a well, how would you say this? Like a volcano that at some point we're going to lose the benefit of it, and we're all going to suffer the consequences of not catching it early enough.
I think we've already lost that benefit. I mean, even prior to shooters, I would have still said this, is that whatever's posted on social media is what people believe. And they have the ability to control what is in your newsfeed, what is hidden from your newsfeed.
They're determining all the algorithms.
You know, there's the shadow ban. I don't know if you ever heard about that.
Sure, yeah.
And, you know, you can get, if you start posting stuff they don't like, but that they can't officially ban you for, they do what's called a shadow ban, meaning your posts just don't show up in news feeds.
Right.
And so they have the ability to control whatever the population sees. Whatever the population sees, that's what they think.
Okay. So that brings me to this. With everything that's going on in the world right now, how invested do you think the tech companies are right now in their own agendas? What I mean by that is the truth of the virus is bad enough, but we know that social media has tasked themselves with being sort of the morality police. Agree or disagree with them, but they've taken it upon themselves to decide what information gets out there. What do you think are the consequences right now of social media during the pandemic?
I mean, it could be a lot of consequences, yet we'll never really know, because without it, you wouldn't know what would have happened or wouldn't have happened.
Okay.
And with them controlling the flow of information of what they want and pushing their own agendas, they basically have the ability to tell a population what to think and how to think it.
Yeah.
And they're gonna, if they don't like what you have to say, they're gonna silence you.
Here's what makes me nervous. This is one of the things that's going on right now that makes me nervous, is that there's so much gray area right now. And in the gray areas, that's where you lose ground, or you lose freedoms or liberties, because people are willing right now to, like after 9/11, when all of a sudden the Patriot Act allows pretty much freedom of information of all of our private information. And this is not even me wearing an aluminum hat. This is just me saying, like, we see that there were some freedoms given up in that. The pastor the other day in Florida that gets arrested because he's having church, I don't think he should have been having church. And I don't even agree with a lot of what that guy teaches. I don't know if I agree with anything that he teaches, but because he had church and there was 500 people in attendance, they actually arrested this guy. So what's interesting to me is, because of the timing of it, if they would have arrested him 3 months ago, everybody would have been in an uproar. But now, because of what's going on with the pandemic, a pastor gets arrested and everybody's like, yeah, good. Pastors are saying this. Yeah, good. Arrest him for having church. I'm like, that just seems like such a slippery slope. It feels like we are going in a direction that we don't want to go. Even like a tent pole, if you think of like a tent pole, the space that it creates under it, the freedom, the liberties that I have in ministry also protect me, but they also protect this nut job. So if I call down the pole on this guy, then I'm actually calling it back down on myself also. Like, I have to be careful that even though that guy's doing something I disagree with, the same freedom that's supposed to protect that guy is the exact same freedom that protects me.
Exactly. And have you ever seen the movie Social Network? It's actually, okay.
It's about Zuckerberg though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that actually does not really put him in a good light. It shows that he screwed over everyone he ever knew creating Facebook. It wasn't even his idea. He stole it and had to pay
the twins or something, right?
Yeah, and had to pay him $65 million later on when it became famous. And then his roommate, who came up with the algorithm for it, the movie says undisclosed settlement. News reports have said 500 million.
Jeez.
And the guy has literally hosed everyone he's ever been close to in his life to push his own personal agendas. And so whatever you're seeing on Instagram,
and now Facebook owns Instagram.
Yep.
And then the other guy, Jack, who's the guy the Twitter guy, Jacob, what's the guy
I know who you're talking about. I can't think of the name either. I know who you're talking about.
But like, you listen to him talk, and they all say the same thing. They all say, "No, we're just trying to like protect the margins," and yet in my mind, it all kind of leans a certain direction, and it doesn't seem like that it leans in favor of religious liberties. It doesn't seem like it leans in favor of conservative values. And like I said, now I'm starting to sound like a kook. But in your perspective, I mean, we're in a position where, in my mind, those tech companies are at a.
Well, to me, you don't sound like a kook, because you can Google this information and find
Jack Dorsey.
Tons and tons of information about this exact subject that has been proven true.
Yeah.
From deleting pages to the shadow bans. And you look at how Zuckerberg has sucked up to every president since George Bush.
Right.
Because Trump was calling for Facebook to get broken up until Zuckerberg went into the White House twice. And now you don't hear that from Trump anymore. Yeah. But you hear it from, the only thing that Trump and Pelosi have ever agreed on, unfortunately at separate times, was to break up Facebook. And, Pelosi's been calling for it lately, and then I'm sure you're going to see Zuckerberg go kiss up to her a little bit, right, and then she'll back off it. And so the guy has major pull and political influence, right? Because if not, he'll delete their account.
Yeah, so now it's like the silver or the bullet that Escobar used to have, of like, we will reward you for playing along, or we'll punish you for not. And that's too much power for someone to have in any platform. Exactly.
And you're talking about, the Russian meddling through Facebook. Well, what about the Facebook meddling?
Yeah. So you spent enough time in other countries that don't have the kind of freedom that we have here. You see stuff there that establishes the reality, like, that life does not have to be the way that we have it in America. what we enjoy here in America is very intentional. And if we're not careful and we just take it for granted, we assume it's going to be that way forever, then I think that's the quickest way to end up back in a situation where we don't have the sort of freedoms that we're experiencing now. What do you see as the threat right now? I don't even know if I want to go down that road. You saw stuff. Okay, let's just go here because I'm curious. This is one of my favorite things to hear you talk about. Right now, what is the most believable kind of subsurface rumbling you're hearing about what's going on right now?
With the virus situation right now?
With the world like it is today, because like everything in the world sort of turned upside down, which that creates opportunity. It creates opportunity. Social media is like really ramping up the quarantine thing, which I think is a good idea. I think it's probably fine. I think that's probably fine that they're really pushing for that. What is going on? Because here's my question. Because there's so much opportunity, and opportunistic people always look for opportunities, and right now it presents itself, right? What opportunities do you see that are going on subsurface? Because everybody's asking, like, what's really going on? In your mind, what do you think is going on that we don't know about?
Well, you know, they say always follow the money.
Okay.
And when this whole thing started, people were losing their jobs, they're losing their money. And what would you do every day when you'd wake up? First thing, what would you do when this whole thing was starting to really get
Try
real?
to check in on the news and see what's happening.
Exactly. Everyone would, you know, go to their phone, go to CNN.com, go to Fox.com, whatever, and check out the news.
Okay.
And so the more the media could hype it, and the more that you're checking it, the better their ratings, the more they can charge for the advertisements, which during election years double in price.
Yeah.
And so the media, and now it's actually kind of come full circle where newspapers and a lot of media are getting laid off because now that everything's shut down.
They got caught in their own trap.
Exactly. No one can afford to advertise. Without the advertising money, the media isn't getting paid unless you're one of the major networks that are still getting the ad stuff.
Right.
But I think, you know, when it was first started, the more the media
They're pouring gas on it.
Yeah, the more the media could hype it, the more they could charge for the advertising, the more money they were making. And they hyped it up to what it is now. And it don't get me wrong, it is a legitimate, serious threat.
Yeah.
But H1N1, if you look at that outbreak, was way more severe than this.
Right. But was that an election year? Was H1N1 an election year?
I think
I'd
it was
have to look it up.
2009. So I don't think it was an election year.
Which might explain why it didn't get as much press when it was literally a very serious threat.
Well, in 2017, it killed 70,000 Americans.
Yeah.
Nothing. No press. And that wasn't even the bad outbreak year. In 2008-9, when we had the outbreak, it was a six-figure number.
Do you think that this is going to precipitate a war? I mean, do you think that we're looking at some other countries or some other places that are looking at this as an opportunity?
It's definitely a possibility. In fact, we told you that about a week ago. I said, you know, in 2 or 3 months, it'd be a good time for another superpower to hit us. And then I think it was like 3 days later, we find out they moved everyone from the Pentagon, and the nuclear arsenal is now
NORAD.
Yeah, underground in the bunker.
Yeah.
So apparently they see that as well.
So NORAD, if someone's listening, because I lived in Colorado Springs for a little while. NORAD is the city that they built at 2,000 feet below the surface in a mountain. Is it Cheyenne?
Cheyenne Mountain Range.
So they're moving people that are related to nuclear power 2,000 feet below the surface right now. And so you hear that and you go like, why? And like maybe it's reasonable. Maybe it's a logical explanation. You sent it to me and I'm like, what? And I, of course, like everything you send me, I look it up and it's accurate. But their explanation was we don't want to have people subjected to the potential outbreak and lose people that are so necessary to our nuclear power.
That makes total sense. But why couldn't you just quarantine them on a base like you have everyone else in the military? Like throwing them underground to me was the kind of the weird part of just, you know, close down the base.
Right.
You got the cooks, the grocery stores, everything you need. Like you can quarantine a town, you can quarantine a base even easier.
Right.
It's already fenced with guard towers.
But specifically underground seems like a very, what's the word? Preemptive. Like that. Like in their minds, they see it as a possibility that.
Definitely preemptive, possibly overreaction, or maybe not. Yeah. That's kind of.
What are you hearing like from friends that are still in, or friends that are overseas, or whatever you got? Like what are people saying Does anybody know? I mean, in your mind, do you like Trump tweeted the other day, like Iran is putting together a sneak attack. It wouldn't be very smart, something like that. Just probably some sort of verbal warning of like, hey, we're on to you, or to try to dissuade. Are you hearing anything in regards to that? Like something that the details of what's going on?
That's always been a threat. So you got the proxies in Iraq that have been there since I was, there when I first got there in 2009.
Yeah, and probably always will be.
Yeah. And they're always going to be fighting. If you look at that whole region, it's never been at peace.
Right.
Ever. And so right now they're fighting us. If
Right.
we leave, they'll fight each other. That's just kind of what they do.
So you don't look at what Trump said as anything specific or unique. It's just sort of a blanket general. Yeah, we know that you're still there. Yeah, we know you're not going to ever quit. And so just know that we haven't gone to sleep over here. Or do you think it was something more targeted?
A combination of both. And so there's definitely probably some chatter that, hey, another few rocket attacks are going to happen, base attacks, stuff like that. And, it's not the Iran military doing it, but they're giving the weapons,
Right.
giving the
Right.
arms and money.
Kind of the same thing they always do, which is try to recruit more powerful friends.
Yeah, or just stupid friends that'll do this for money.
Yeah.
I can never understand like the suicide bombers. You hear about how frequent that is over there.
Right.
And it was almost like, how do they get people to do this? Well, then you find out that
They're all high, right? I mean, isn't it like...
But what they do is they'll give your family $100,000 if you do this.
Oh, I got you.
And which $100,000 over there, like that's about
nothing.
It's about $100 million. Like your great grandkids are
gosh.
never working.
Really?
Yeah, it's an exuberant amount of money to them, especially in Afghanistan. And the Taliban does pay. So if you go do this, they will pay your family. And so for them,
Recruiting stupid people, not stupid people who are willing to do something stupid for a payment.
well, so their family can have a better life.
Yeah.
Or grandkids, whatever. And also, because it's a holy war, if you die in a holy war, you're guaranteed your spot in heaven.
Right.
In Islam.
Yep.
And so you become a martyr that everyone's going to celebrate, and you get an extra 7 virgins or whatever when you get to heaven. I'm not exactly sure how it works out, but
Haven't looked into it. So what would you, from somebody watching that's like, okay, what's going on right now? What do we not know? What is the big secret hidden threat? I'm not saying that you would specifically for sure know. I'm just saying in your mind, if somebody's listening, what are we, 2 months, 3 months, 5 months? In your mind, how far are we from seeing this thing sort of start to go back to normal?
we're probably going to see some normalcy happen this summer, but then it's going to come back in the fall. If they don't start doing the antibody stuff with the blood or come out with the vaccine, it's going to come back. And so we'll probably get out of quarantine June, July, but then you're going to start seeing the deaths kick back up in fall. And it'd be one of those things like, will media cover it or not? Because if you want to compare it to past, like H1N1 when it first peaked in 2008-9, or even just 2017, there's no coverage. I think
right. It almost isn't a story unless they make it one. Like even if it did come back, we might not even be aware of the impact because they're onto something different.
Exactly, and so it's gonna, when's the media gonna change the topic basically?
I've wondered that if it wasn't, and I, like I said, I'm not even saying this is my opinion, but I've wondered that had it not got the kind of coverage that it's been given, like if the media decided that there were other things that they were going to focus on, I am curious. Don't tie me to this if you're listening. Don't crucify me over this. I am curious what it would have looked like for our nation had they just pretty much said like, yeah, you could get it. It wouldn't be good. Are we talking about people that are actually stacked up at the hospitals like they're saying? Or I shouldn't even say that because I know it is. I know it's bad. I know that it is. And like listening to nurses and things like that, I'm not downplaying it. I'm just wondering if we've also had other things that were equally as bad that we got through. It just didn't get the hype or it didn't get the coverage.
Definitely. H1N1 for sure was worse than this. If you talk to doctors, they'll tell you that it was worse. The death rate was higher. The hospitals, they had people dying in the waiting room.
Yeah.
Now you need a ventilator and stuff before you die. Like they had people just dropping dead in the waiting room. Like that's how quick it was taking people.
Jeez.
And I'm not saying COVID isn't bad, don't get me wrong, or saying like, oh, this is nothing. But there's been a lot worse stuff out there that the media didn't want to cover.
So tell me why there are people who think this is not just from somebody eating a bat, that there's more to it, that there is something more nefarious taking place. Why? I'm not saying that's what's happening, but the people who believe that, what's that based on?
Well, I think that's based on the biological weapons research facility in Wuhan.
Okay.
And it's one of 2 research facilities in all of China. It happens to be in Wuhan, where the virus originated. And there's been more and more feeding that lately, now they've actually figured out which bat it came from. It's the horseshoe bat is how they track the virus back to. And that bat is not sold in any of the wet markets there. And the nearest habitat for it is 600 miles away from Wuhan. And so there's more conspiracies or ideas out there that this virus really was in a lab. Not that they released it as a weapon, more just it may have gotten out on accident.
Well, and they say that the credence for that theory, again, not connecting myself to the theory, but that it's not attacking the young people. And I know there are people that have gotten it that have died. I know that. But they said most viruses would attack somebody with a compromised immune system or a newly developing immune system, meaning they haven't been around long enough to develop an immune system. This one isn't. And so in my mind, that would at least make me scratch my head and go, why would there be a virus that attacks the elderly rather than attacking the young? And that was the first question I ever heard that I was like, yeah, not a scientist, not a biologist, nothing like that. But if you were going to design something to cause panic, but not let it get too far out of control, it seems logical that somebody would consider that it would attack the elderly, cause all the chaos, cause all the fear, cause all the panic, but not attack the younger people. I mean, I think that was the first time I ever heard it and went, oh, yeah, it is weird that people with a young immune system don't seem to be more at risk.
Makes sense. And I mean, also when you look at other governments, young people really aren't in charge. And so that's another, thought fueling the whole, this was a weapon thing, because if you take out the elders, you took out the leaders.
Interesting.
And, like you said, this, if you're young and not compromised in any way, you can be asymptomatic, meaning you have this thing, you won't even know it.
Right.
And so that's another.
So like the basketball players, they're getting it, and they're saying, but I feel fine, I could play in a game today. Well, they've tested positive, how they got a test in the first place, but they've tested positive, but then there's literally, they're saying almost no symptoms whatsoever. The young people, like you're saying, are asymptomatic, but then still contagious. So if you're trying to weaponize something, you would weaponize it in a way, not saying this is what's happening, you would weaponize it in such a way that it could be spread by the young people to the people that are in positions of leadership without the young people even knowing that they had it.
Exactly. And, early February, there was I want to say Swedish scientist that had mapped this thing out and said he found a part of it that was human made in the actual virus's DNA sequence, genome, however you want to word it.
Okay.
Said that this sequence right here is not in nature. This is only in man-made stuff.
Okay.
And all these other scientists came out and basically swept them under the rug, saying, "There's no way you've already coded this thing. Like, we aren't even close. If we can't do it, you couldn't have done it."
Okay.
And what that to me was them sweeping them under the rug by saying, "Well, I can't do this, so that means you can't."
There's a personal connection to him being wrong. Like they personally benefit from him being wrong.
Personally benefit, and just it's jealousy, I guess would be a good way of looking at it.
Right. Well, and like I said, I wouldn't say that it's weaponized. I don't think it's weaponized. I think it is possible that something took that we know that biological warfare exists. We already know that. We know that there was a Chinese scientist at the Harvard lab that got arrested in February.
Yep.
So we're aware that things like this take place, and like you said, the chances that it escaped or got out or some sort of mutation, that to me makes way more sense than it being actually released intentionally. But it does kind of, like I said, at least gives credence to the people who are out there like with their tinfoil hats and trying to make a theory.
Yeah, I don't think this was necessarily released as a weapon. I think they were probably studying some stuff, didn't understand how contagious it was. Someone was a little bit careless.
Uh-oh.
And, or was asymptomatic went home, spread it all over the marketplace when they were
Yeah.
grocery shopping, not, didn't even have a fever because they still haven't found patient zero.
Yeah, that to me is crazy. Like that. Yeah, there's just a lot. There's a lot of it. So, the defense contract jobs, you were saying, like, how is this affecting what you're doing right now as far as work?
So with the overseas stuff, there's really not any kind of change because you still got to have the troops on the bases getting protected, stuff like that, security details. For the past few years, I've been training special operations, and all that has ceased. They've put a hold on all
Civilians
outside
training military.
Yeah, and so all that's been on hold. I suppose a few hops later this month, not a more stand
And
out.
you're saying this, they don't want to risk a civilian getting on base and affecting the health of the base. Is that right?
A lot of the bases have been locked down, and so outsiders, you're just not coming on.
Yeah.
And
Well, and like you said, that makes sense. If it attacks the older people, then it could potentially attack the leaders. So it's not necessarily the soldiers on base; it's the people that are kind of help coordinating, making things run. The leadership aspect. Those are the people that are going to be at most risk, which would be the most damaging. I mean, if that person were to get sick. So
earlier we were talking about the aircraft carrier that's currently docked at Guam, and the captain was freaking out, saying, "If you don't do something, we're all going to die." And the average age on that ship's like 20 or 21.
But
he was, if you're the captain of the ship, you're probably one of the oldest.
Right.
Not, maybe a couple of guys under him that are a little bit older that didn't want to move up, but
right.
He was really freaking out about he might die because he's the oldest person on the boat.
Let's be honest. You guys stop it because I'm at risk instead of we're all at risk.
Yeah, and for me, it's kind of like, let the military get it now, get the antibody in their system, and then they're not going to get hit with this thing, 20, 30, 40 years from now when it could be problematic.
Right.
For the rest of society, like, we definitely need to protect them, protect the elders, keep them until we can get a vaccine or something.
Sure.
Keep them inside and away. As far as everyone else, get this thing now and get it out of your system. Just don't give it to anyone.
Yeah.
If you do get sick, just self quarantine, and when you can get the antibody test, make sure you got it.
Well, they're confident. Like everything I'm reading, they're confident you're not going to catch it twice. Like once you've got it, you've had it, and then you're immune to it. Like there is a system by which you recover, and you are then immune. So if that's the case, then by like August, I think we've got a higher infection rate. You said about the test. I think we've got a higher infection rate than we realize. But that also means we're going to have a higher level of immunities. We're going to have way more people immune to it than what we thought because of the tests. And like you're saying, the antibody test, you could retroactively see if someone has it to see if they've had it, right?
Yes.
And so I think those, in my mind, those are the tests that I'm so interested to see, because what we might find is like, oh my gosh, if we would have known, we would have panicked. But turns out pretty much everybody got it, and we got through it, and now the immunities are there.
I think that's also going to tell us the real timeline on this thing too, because when China was panicking, we were in impeachment, and that's the only thing the media wanted to cover.
Sure.
And they kind of swept this thing under the rug until after the impeachment. Then all of a sudden now it's blown up into this big deal.
Right.
But we don't really know when it actually started. We know when China declared a problem.
Dude, hey,
and
this is no joke. We had friends that came back from Vegas. Now, Vegas is kind of a global city, right?
I lived there for 5 years, so I understand.
Right, yeah. So we had friends that came back from Vegas this year in December that would have respiratory issues, like felt like they were breathing glass and high temperatures. They were vomiting, and so they're like, well, it couldn't have been that because they were sick. Well, now they're saying that is a symptom. Like there are people that come with the stomach stuff and tested negative for everything. Tested negative. They could not figure out what was going on. And this is like December 15th. And I mean, like I've got a few friends that it was and I'm not saying that they had it, but I am saying that whatever they did have, they got really, really sick. I mean, it was like this 2-week long stretch of like, what is going on? So if that's the case, my point is, if that's the case, our recovery rate, we might be even further down the road than what people realize as far as getting better.
Definitely true. And, we could also go back and look at, we won't be able to test them, obviously, but we could have been having deaths in high numbers in December, and doctors were writing it off to flu turned into pneumonia, which is very common in elderly people.
Sure.
And
a friend of ours, his grandpa, got sick in December, had to take him in. Like he almost died. Like he was pneumonia. He's older, but pneumonia, high fever, and like they were like, hey, kind of be getting ready. Like we don't know how this is gonna go. and he recovered and he's fine. He's back to good again. That was in December, and it was same thing. He had a fever. They thought it was bronchitis. They thought it was bronchitis that was causing the fever, turned into pneumonia, and they're like, hey, this is, whatever this is terrible. Again, December, so.
I'd be curious to see if he gets the antibody test,
Right.
if he test positive for it or not.
And as luck would have it, you are the only person I have ever known that gets married. You're a newlywed and instantly goes into quarantine. Like that is.
That's kind of been our joke lately is we get married and the apocalypse happens.
There you go.
Go figure.
There you go. Look what you started. No, that's perfect. Like I said, that's kind of as a guy, that's kind of what you hope for. You're like, hey, we just got married. Sorry, honey. I mean, I know that we would love to be out doing things, but we're just going to have to stay at home alone.
Yep.
Sorry.
World's ending, But that also kind of fueled the whole media thing because we were actually on our honeymoon, which was a road trip because we were afraid at the time if we left the country that we might not be able to get back.
Probably looking back on it, that probably wasn't too far off.
Well, looking back, we were really glad with our choice. But, you're driving on the road or you're out doing stuff. The first thing we do every time we stopped, got to a new house, hotel, wherever we were staying, was turn on the news. Okay, what's going on with the virus today? Like, where is it at? Because that's when it was spreading throughout the world, and we were watching cases. Now they're going up by 25,000 a day. At the time, it was like 500 a day.
Right. I remember when it was 20 cases, and they were all in Washington, and people thought it was really, really bad.
Yep.
And I'll make this point. We talked about it before. When the rule of exponential numbers, this is what's interesting to me. And like I said, I'm not a professional, but if you have one person that gets it and it doubles to 2, nobody cares. I mean, it's like, it's bad, but of course, one person was contagious. If it goes from 2 to 4, you're like, I mean, it takes a long time of the numbers doubling daily, doubling, daily. It takes a while before it gets to a significant number. But as that number gets bigger, if you maintain the same scale, then you should see it if it's doubling. Stick with me. If it's doubling from 100,000, the same rule of exponential numbers means that tomorrow it should be 200,000, and then 400,000, and then 800,000, and then 1.6. See what I mean?
Yep.
And that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing that it was doubling, and now it's like, in the last week we have 100,000 new cases. And as bad as that is, exponentially, it has slowed down. The numbers are going up, but it's not, the whole number isn't doubling every single day anymore. And whether that matters or not, I don't know. I really don't know. But in my mind, I see that as like, yes, the scale is still doing this. Like if you look at it on a scale, the scale is still doing this. But for a while, we were seeing it double or triple every single day.
That's true, but also back then we didn't have the amount of tests. And so if we only had 1,000 tests that were made that day and we tested 1,000 people, 500 of them had it.
Yeah.
We were still ramping up the production of these tests. And it could, like if you could go to an ATM right now and get your finger pricked and it tells you if you had it, the number could still be doubling every day. We wouldn't really know.
Yeah.
But
we know the deaths. I mean, we know that the deaths are what they are. That we do have pretty solid numbers on because you don't have to have a coronavirus test to know if somebody's dead. So we know what the deaths are. And even if the number is doing whatever as far as positive, negative, we know that the deaths are climbing, but it's not like we've had 4,000 people die in a day. Like our spike on the fatality is still, in my mind, we're able to kind of track that one and see that it's not what we want it to be, but it's not.
Okay, so the scary thing about that is the people that are dying today got sick 10 days to 2 weeks ago. So the numbers that you're seeing today, like, if 30,000 people got sick today, those people are going to be the ones that are dying in 10 to 14 days.
So that's where we would see the spike in the.
And so that's what, they keep talking about the spike or the apex. We haven't hit it yet because we got to see the infection rate going down before, and then when the infection rate goes down, 2 weeks after that is when the deaths will start really going down.
I got you.
And so as long as the amount of the cases increases, the deaths going to keep increasing. Yeah. But then again, with more testing available, it's hard to get a real accurate judge of
that makes sense
of how fatal this thing really is.
Yeah. So you keep quarantine, you stay in, you limit your social interaction, you do your social distancing, you wash your hands, and just kind of wait and see how it goes.
Pretty much. I mean, as a hermit, I found out that I've been in quarantine for a long time. You know,
I swear to you, I told Lacey, I'm a little bit concerned because everybody's quarantined, and I'm telling Lacey, I'm like, this is kind of how we've been living for a little while. Maybe this is something we ought to reconsider. Like, we really, honestly, we more than average, it's not good. Like, I'm recognizing now, I'm like, I need to get out more. Like, I need to invest into time, into people better than I have to this point. Like, it's been kind of an eye-opener for me. You're saying you're a hermit, you're fine with it. I'm saying I need to get better about it. I need to get back out in the world again. Later when it blows over. It doesn't have to be right now.
Yeah, probably not right now is the best time. You know, but for an introvert, you know, this is great because now we have even more of an excuse. Like, oh, nope, can't go to your party because we'll get arrested. It's illegal for you to have that, actually.
Yeah, sorry. I would. I would have loved it, but
I'll even call it in if you're going to have it and still invite me. Like, if you don't invite me, I'll keep my mouth shut. Yeah.
Well, man, I appreciate you coming in. It's interesting. It's a cool story.
It's been fun. Thanks for having me. And, you know, everyone out there, just stay healthy, wash your hands, take care of your elders, check on your neighbors around you.
It's a good time to be a newlywed. Lots of good advice.
Yep. I think, you know, a lot of people are starting to appreciate their parents more because of this.
Yeah.
Because you're checking on your parents, your grandparents, and, you know, the safe, you know, check on them, do the shopping for them, put the groceries, you know, in their pantry, on their porch, inside the door, whatever. Let them sit for a couple of days because, you know, just being in the air, the virus will die.
Right.
You know, it's really hard to Lysol a whole bag of chips off or a carton of cookies or something, but the safest thing you can do is just let it sit for 3 days, and whatever was on the store is going to, you know, keep them safe.
I tell you what I think is really cool, and I don't want to have to drag it out, but like when you think about my grandparents' generation, that's the people that are still here, they are getting preferential treatment. Like, a lot of what we're doing is on their behalf, which is great. I think that's awesome. But they're almost getting to see the world return to what they had seen with, like, people being home, people mowing their own yards, being friendly with each other. Like, that's got to be cool in that generation to kind of see that, like, hey, the world did sort of level off for a little while. We know it's going to go back to crazy again. But, like, how cool is that in these years of their life, they're getting to see things sort of, I mean, as far as, like, cell phone use and traveling and going and all the chaos of the world. We drove through Butte the other day. I told Lacey, like, it's cool to know that people are home. Like, you see almost a mellowing or a rest coming back in. You're not missing out on anything because nothing's going on. There's a part of it I'm going to miss, to be honest. Like, when this goes back to normal, there's a little part of it that there's going to be like, oh, it's kind of nice to slow down.
The thing I'm going to miss, you know, if you've gone to the grocery store or anywhere like that in the past week, this is what traffic in Oregon was like 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yes. Yeah, the traffic part's been great.
And having grown up here, like, this is what traffic has been like.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely something I will miss of the quarantine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, thanks for jumping on. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. Signing off.
Great.
Perfect.
Cool.